Hey everyone, welcome back to Uplifting Studios TV. And today I am joined by an amazing woman. Her name is Winitha Bonney. And if you do not know her, lean in closer because she's somebody you will most definitely want to know. She is a thought leader for the advancement of women of color. She's also the founder of #Colorful Conference, which is the very first conference here in Australia for women of color. And I believe we'll be digging in a little bit deeper into that and Vinita sharing about that conference that will be happening later on this year. But welcome, Winitha.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Annie.
I'm so excited to have you on here, and we have so much to talk about. But I want us to go back and for us to get to know you a little bit and tell us about, growing up, where you grew up, and how you've come to where you are today. I know it's a long story, but maybe just take us back to your childhood.
Yeah, so my parents are Sri Lankan background. They were born and raised in Jaffna, Sri Lanka, which is up the top, right up north. My dad left for educational reasons, but I'm glad he left when he did, because when he left not soon after a civil war broke out, which lasted for quite a long time. My dad migrated to London. My mother followed him a year later. I think she was only 19 at the time. Obviously, it would have been a massive culture shock for them coming from a small town village, in Sri Lanka to the big smokes to London. And my mum does tell me, every now and then stories of racism in London and what that actually was and how it looked like. I was born in England around that time. My mum called me Michelle, which is my middle name, because she was scared that people would tease me because, Winitha is an ethnic sounding name. I actually found out that Winitha is actually Dutch, and that is a result of colonization as to my last name. So I've actually met a couple of Indigenous people here in Australia who share the same last name as I do, spelled exactly the same way, and that is a result of colonization. So we migrated to Australia when I was quite young. I think I was about 4 or 5 at the time. And when I was 14 or 15 years old, I got introduced to business studies in high school, and it was pretty much love at first numbers. So I went to uni. I, like many women of color, have had multiple tertiary qualifications. I've had several businesses, and not just as a result of my experience, but I think hearing and seeing the stories of other women of color has propelled me now to become an expert in this space, doing this work now.
Yeah, and you mentioned something when we spoke before that in the spaces that you were around, that you were the only, you happened to be the only person of color, and you took it back like right from kindy up to your tertiary studies, just being that little girl or person of color in a room. And do you think that has then informed the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, it was pretty normal to me. So I think I saw myself as being the only as a normality, right? Like, this is, what's wrong with this picture, until I went to go work and live in the States and in Canada for a little bit, and saw a lot more people of color. This was really back in the early 2000s. We did not have the African population in Australia right now as back then. And so being around more people of color, Black and brown people, just really opened up my eyes to the fact that, hey, I was actually the only. And that has formed my experiences. One of my strengths has been around research. So it's not that I really dwelled into my experiences or had such traumatic experiences. It's been, quite similar to a lot of other women of color. But what actually propelled me to dive into this work has actually been a question around why aren't there other women of color? And so as I dove into the research, as I started doing a lot of, reading a lot of papers, asking a lot of questions, having a lot of conversations, that kind of spurred on this energy really that I have around doing this work. So it started off with my experiences that got really unraveled when I was in the States. I came back with a question, and then through deep research, it's actually uncovered a really big problem that we have in Australia. And I guess the entrepreneur in me, really wants to solve that problem, not just for myself, but for, my sisters as well.
And you mentioned that you've always been interested in business, you've always had that love for business. How was it, getting into your corporate career? And did you encounter any barriers at all or challenges being a woman of color?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I only went back to using my first name probably about 3-4 years ago. So yeah, so really, so that was a huge change for me, right? Because now people will call me, and I was like, who's Winitha? Like I had to really train myself. It was like a completely new identity for me. But I was named after my dad, Winfred, and I really wanted to honor my dad as well. So, yeah, when I started using that name, even in the workplace, I encountered just really simple things around, the moment that I would say, hey, you can call me Winnie, they'll be like, oh, yeah, we'll call you Winnie. I would say, I'd put my name forward on an application or something, and I would get a lot less, responses, as opposed to when I used my middle name, which was Michelle Bonney, and in all my career with jobs and things like that, which is ironic because like Winitha is actually a Dutch name. So, I would walk into interview rooms, and this is before I started using Winitha, and people kind of literally do this because they had this assumption that I was probably like a 50, 60-year-old, white woman, and this young looking brown thing comes walking through the room. And they were just, you just see them like trying to connect it in their brain of like, you just kind of walked in. I had, my resume practically, metaphorically, ripped to shreds in front of me because people didn't understand that what they saw in front of me was the same person that was in the resume. There was this assumption that I had lied about my experience, lied about my qualifications. I'm like a lot of women of color, like, I was working full-time, I was running a non-for-profit, I was doing, dance training practically full-time, I was doing my master's, I was volunteering, and so they would see all these things that all had similar dates that covered roughly a similar time frame. And like, how are you doing all this? And I'm like, because I want to, because I choose to, those situations. When I was in Canada, I overheard a CEO of one of like the equivalent of like 7 or 9 or 10 network here in Australia. I heard the CEO of one of the biggest networks comment to my boss that if she was a man, he would have thought that she would have hired me for other reasons. And he just kind of cackled at that. I've had people underestimate me. I've had people in my early mid-30s say to me, oh, your parents must be really proud of you. I was like, I'm a little bit too old for that. and it's like, would you ask that of like a white colleague, because I work here and I have this job title that my parents are proud of me. Like, my parents are proud of me, but like, what's that got to do with it, right? When I would say to people that, that asked me what my dad did, and I would tell them, they had all these perceptions in their mind. And, when I would say to them, that he actually is quite a successful business person in his own right, they'll just be like hard for them to kind of, because people have this
concept,
Yeah, and look, my parents did originally come from a war-torn country. You know, they did come from an area that looks very much like a village.
Mm.
But that is not their narrative today, you know.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
are very,
And you know the thing is, Winitha, with your story and a lot of these conversations that I'm having with other migrant women of color rising is that there is so much similarity to it. There is, the idea of being underestimated, the preconceived idea of, oh, so you're a person of color, so you're kind of put in a particular box of you are not capable of doing A, B, C, D. And there's this stereotype out there, particularly in corporate, I must say, that, even when you go for job interviews, you're looked at slightly less favorably because maybe you're not bringing to the team or the culture that what they were hoping for or expecting. And this is all, unconscious bias. So I think this is a theme that I'm seeing through a lot of these interviews that I'm having. And so, getting into your entrepreneurial journey, and that's where I really want us to focus on, Winitha, if we may. Getting into that, how was that for you? Obviously, growing up here more so and being exposed to I guess having lived here longer, whereas for somebody like myself, I came here as an adult. I came here to study my university studies, tertiary studies, and so a lot of my growing up had happened in my home country of Kenya. But how was it for you, entering into that entrepreneurial journey?
I was pretty naive. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I still am to some degree. I found myself in a lot of spaces where it's predominantly, white middle-aged men. I've always been a little bit of a fighter though. So even when I was in kindergarten, I cornered to, little white guys and showed them my muscles and said, mine are bigger than yours. So yeah, so it challenged me in a lot of ways. I think it really challenged my femininity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd walk into event spaces, startup events and things like that, and would have my hair done and my makeup and big skirt and stuff like that, and immediately, even clothes aside, even from my skin color, immediately people can see that I'm different and you know it's like where's Winitha? Oh right, she's over there.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, I had to learn very quickly to leverage my differences, um,
Mm-hmm.
so that I'm not just showing up, I'm standing out. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me was part of my branding, right? Because I could have instantly sat on my pity party and was like, I drifted to the back of the room and said, I don't want to be the only. I'm sick and tired of being the only. Even
Yeah.
in boardrooms and things like that, sick and tired of being the only, being mistaken for the person that gets a coffee, being constantly underestimated me. And so, but instead, what I saw all those um, instances and situations as really fuel to make me stand out. So I thought,
Mm.
the marketplace is, if you think about it from a marketing perspective, the marketplace is really quite littered with everyone that kind of looks and sounds the same. Hey, I'm actually different. So let's leverage that and let's use that to my advantage in order to get my point across, my brand across, my business across. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so that so that I really do, stand out. I'm not just showing up on a day-to-day basis in my
Yeah.
business.
I love that you're not just showing up, but you're also standing up. That's a
Yeah,
powerful statement. And in order to be able to stand up and not just show up, you've got to have done a lot of inner work in
yeah,
terms of your self-limiting beliefs. Because when
mhm,
I think of my journey, Winitha, the thing that has held me back for so long were my self-limiting beliefs. Thinking that I wasn't good enough, thinking that I didn't have anything of value to put out in this way,
mhm,
that I just needed to, stay in my lane and be quiet and just kind of just have very average life and not ask too much or do too much. Just do what was required to do, and just keep it there and not stand out. So this is a lot. I've had to do a lot of work to be able to go like, this is where I feel my calling is. This is where I feel I need to speak up about. And so for you, what self-limiting beliefs have you been faced with that you've had to sort of, loosen the grip of and move on so that you can do the work that you're doing, because you're doing big work?
Yeah. And have to have a lot of tough conversations with people, particularly a lot of corporates. So the two that really come up the most are, I'm not smart enough and I'm not good enough. And they're really stories of stemmed from school, when I was forced to stand up in front of everyone, I think within my first week, and was told that my parents were supposed to have taught me the time, how to tell the time. And I remember standing in front of everyone and being told off in front of everyone by the teacher. Wow. And that's where it really stemmed from. I think it's also part of the migrant journey that our parents or we ourselves have told ourselves that we have to work harder, we have to be smarter, we have to do better.
Absolutely.
And underneath that really is this story around, or this narrative around, I'm not good and sufficient as I am.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in, and I think there's a very delicate balance here, but I'm a very big believer in leveraging negative emotions. So just like, when I walk into those entrepreneurial rooms where I was the only woman of color and would instantly feel the brownness of my skin, I would imagine my soul and my spirit filling out my body to the depths of my skin, and it absolutely glowing and owning that 100%. So for me, it is, when I experience those negative situations and those stories come into play, it's not that I want to silence those stories and those narratives straight away. I actually see it as an opportunity to really kind of leverage that and use it as fuel to help achieve and to do and to move forward. Because what tends to happen is, as we achieve things, as we start to see the fruits of our work, then that evidence that our human soul needs to see to show and prove to ourselves that those things that we told ourselves aren't actually true, they're false. But what we tend to allow is those negative beliefs and limiting beliefs to actually support us and to hold us back. So what I do is I do the complete opposite. I'm very competitive. So if I'm in a room full of, a bunch of white people who think they're all better and smarter than me, that is perfect fuel for me. And it's not that I dislike all white people. I have some fantastic allies. I have some great supporters of Colourful Conference, of the work that I do. But I leverage those negative stories, those negative emotions that are coming up to propel me and push me forward into the work that I'm doing, to put into those uncomfortable places that I wouldn't normally go to if I was feeling completely fine or feeling upbeat.
I completely get you. And so taking it a step back, the term women of color, it's a term that is very widely used in the United States, but not something that is commonly used, let's say Australia, because that's where we're from and that's where we are. Give us a little bit of history about the name itself, women of color, and what you've encountered about using that, even not just with people who are not people of color, but with, women of color. So just give us a little bit of the history there.
Yeah, so the term women of color originated, I believe, in the 1970s. There was a women's conference that took place around equal rights and things like that. And, back then in the 60s and 70s, we started to see quite a big movement around femininity and feminine rights. And it really was predominantly a white movement. So there was a large conference. And as the story goes, there was a bunch of Black women that did not agree with the term minority that was used. So there's, as part of that conference, there was a large report. I don't know if it was compiled by government or the people that were participating in that conference. But there was, out of that 270 or 60, 70 page document, there was a very small sliver that was dedicated towards minority women. And it was, the African-American women that were really outraged by this and decided that they were going to come out with the Black Women's Report. So when the other women of color found out, they wanted to join in, right? They were just like,
Yes.
we also agree. We need to address this. So they all met together. They decided on a term, and that term was women of color. And
Wow.
yeah, and the term was women of color. And so in the States, we see it being used in two ways. We see it being used in that sense that it is to represent, predominantly, African, Latina, Middle Eastern, Asian, Asian women. So basically non-Anglo-Saxon women. And but in the States, we also see it, I think, because of that term being linked to people of color, we see it also being used to describe African-American women only as well. So I never saw myself as CALD, culturally linguistically diverse. I never saw myself as a migrant. I never saw myself as multicultural. I never saw myself as any of those things. One day I applied for a scholarship and was like, oh, hang on, I think I'm CALD, but because I had been in the States, and I think it was sitting in my subconscious, when I made a huge career change and life change about 5 years ago, and that seed or that idea that was planted in me around women of color came to me. The word that came with that was the word women of color, and I think it's because, I even though I don't live in the States, I was only there for a short while, but I follow a lot of content there. I read a lot of content. I'm connected with a lot of people, particularly in the startup space, constantly connected. And that was a word that really resonated with me because I was, in our community, we're born to believe that being dark skinned is a bad thing. That, particularly as women, that you're ugly, that
that is so true.
Yeah, it's such a negative thing. So I really love this term because it almost like forced us to connect ourselves with the thing that either hindered, our ability to move forward, both internally and externally through forces outside of our control generally. So I just loved that it was, particularly being back here in Australia, that it was so punchy. And, I started using that term corporately in terms of my practice, my thought leadership work, at a time when it was not fashionable to use that. And I got a lot of pushback from people that, it was positive discrimination, that, it wasn't inclusive, that culturally diverse was more inclusive, that I prefer the term multiculturalism. I would have some women of color say, they would link it to colorism and derogative terms that are linked to, for example, being a colored person, and they didn't like that term, and I understand, and I agree with that as well. But I think it's looking at the history of that term and where it came from, and it came from a bunch of women that were sitting around a table who decided to take control of their own narrative, and as opposed to a term that is used, by white. So that's a little bit of the history, and I stuck to my guns. I got challenged by a couple of people to rename my conference, Colorful Conference, to not be about women of color, but to be about culturally diverse women. I thought about it for hours, and I thought, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to compromise on that.
Wow, and that's really powerful because you've gone ahead and started this movement, if you like, of women of color. You've got a WhatsApp platform with quite a number of women who come there to get encouragement, inspire each other, and it's just a safe space. It's a good safe space for for women of color to come and just share how they're feeling and just to grow. And with Colorful Conference being the first of its kind, I remember seeing it, and I don't know if I saw it on Business Chicks the first time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a write-up on Business Chicks, and this was back when I was in Perth last year, and I was reading this, and I was going like, "Wow, this is incredible." I know it's based in Melbourne, but I was beginning to think, how can I get myself there? How can I align this so that when the time comes, I can be able to attend a conference like this? Because everything that had been written about it just sounded really colorful and enjoyable, and it was celebrating achievements, and something that I had never ever thought or dreamt would be a reality. And to see that somebody had thought this way and was going to the lengths of putting this together was incredible. And so before we get into #colorful conference, I want us to talk about how women of color can rise in corporate. And I think this is something that's also coming up in our little group, our WhatsApp group. This is something that's coming up a lot about how do you rise in structures that perhaps haven't been created to help us rise. So what would be your words of advice there in terms of women in the corporate arena looking to step up?
Yeah, so the first thing that women of color need to do is speak out. So I've been coaching and mentoring women of color for quite a number of years. I have in my training programs like the Level Up program, and the thing that I am seeing a lot of is not a lot of women of color that are speaking up and out. And the thing that I always remind my students is that I know it's uncomfortable, and I know you will attract some negative consequences, behaviors, and not so nice emotions that will follow as a result of that. But here's the thing: when we don't speak out, we become part of the problem and we become an enabler. So just like with addiction, right? Like if you don't speak out or set boundaries you're basically enabling that person who has that particular addiction to continue on, But what we need to be doing is we need to set very clear boundaries, and we need to communicate what those boundaries are, because people are not psychics. People are not mind readers. People don't know what is going on in our head. I can tell you quite frankly that a lot of people in Australia do not believe that they are racist. A lot of people in Australia believe that they understand what the term women of people of color is and the history behind it. They do not. A lot of people understand. A lot of people think that they understand what white fragility is. They do not. The thing in the States and in North America is that people understand racism, and people of color generally understand racism, in my experience, a lot better than folks in Australia. In Australia, it has been a small pocket of people that understand the language of racism to then be able to identify it in the workplace. So the first step is actually speaking out, because until we speak out, people's behaviors would just perpetuate. And they will just continue that to the next person of color. We need to be very clear about what our boundaries are. We also need to educate ourselves around racism. One of the books that unfortunately didn't get as much airtime during the Aboriginal Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter movement is a book by Ruby Hamad called I have it on my bookshelf, White Tears, Brown Scars. I recommend that to all my students to read as part of their pre-reading. And the first thing they say is like, it's got to be really angry, or it's got a lot of heat in it. I'm like, absolutely. What we haven't given ourselves is an opportunity to actually learn that stuff, and that's part of our toolkit, right? How can we call something out if we don't know what it is, if we don't know what that wound is? The other things that we need to be doing, and I guess more of the sort of fluffy stuff, as if you want to call it that, is stuff around personal branding. So I always recommend to women of color to have yourname.com, to have some kind of presence. It's important for us to take, it's not about promotion. It's actually about taking control of our own narrative. What do I want to be known for in the world? Because what tends to happen in the workplace is we allow the labels of other people, the assumptions of other people, our role titles to become our narrative and to become the label that sticks with us. And what we need to be doing is to create freedom is not necessarily about becoming the CEO of a large organization, but freedom for women of color, I believe, and real leadership is actually starts with self-leadership, and that is the giving yourself permission to be who you want to be, to speak how you want to speak, how you want to act, you know, and to go after what you really want to do. You know, I had one student today who said to me, you know, I realized that, you know, I wanted to be a general manager or a CEO, but I realized that was because I wanted to show the other people that that I, as a woman of color, can also be and do that. But I'm not sure if that's the right intention for me. And I thought that was really powerful, because what we tend to do is we get caught up in the narratives of other people, and freedom is actually defining what success looks like for us and creating that, and not buying into those stereotypes, not buying into these false narratives of who we think we should be, because underneath it is a false fear or a limiting belief. So I definitely recommend for women of color to, you know, not wait, you know, basically don't wait. Don't wait for event organizers to have representation on their speaking panels. Contact them. And I understand that we shouldn't be doing all the work. I understand that it's emotional labor. I understand that there's emotional tax, there's emotional burnout. I understand all that stuff. But I take the stance and the view of Michelle Obama, which is if we wait for equality, we're going to be waiting all our lives. And for me, it's not just about creating equality for myself. It's because when I go down that journey, I help widen the gap in that door a little bit, which makes it easier for the next sister.
That's right.
For the next daughter to go through, to make that a little bit bigger. You know, one of the things that I really like around my framework and methodology around how women of color can advance is this idea of revolution. So, you know, if a lot of us have had the opportunity of taking ownership of our countries back, and that has been through revolting. You know, that has been through we just storming to the workplace and demand that they make us CEO and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But I think it starts in the spirit first. I definitely believe in the spirit first, right? Of, you know, what is, so my recommendation for women of color, what is going to be your own revolution? What is going to be your own revolution? What revolution have you come on this earth to cause? Because that's what you are. You are a revolutionary maker. You are a legacy holder, you know. You know, as a popular saying in the Christian world, you're born to be a victor and not a victim. And when we stay in our comfort zone, we are perpetuating the cycle of suppression and oppression. But through our success, we are creating a pathway that has been trodden and a footprint of which someone else can then follow. And I think that is more powerful rather than succumbing to the narratives of other people.
And so, which brings me to the question, what programs do you provide? So as a coach, a mentor, you know, a thought leader in the advancement for women of color, what programs do you provide that can begin to help women who are struggling or really want to find the identity, stand in their own 2 feet, and be all that they want to be?
Yeah. They're another number, you know, they're on my website, but my most popular one is probably my Level Up program, which I've had for a couple of years now. I don't really publicize it, you know, publicly. Obviously I don't have the capacity because it is one-on-one. It's not a group-based program at this particular stage. But it's a 3-month program where I work with women of color one-on-one. There's 2 facets to the program. So the first program is empowering, educating, and equipping them in a framework that I've developed around how they can thrive in white structures and how they can advance as an empowered woman of color leader, as what I call a warrior leader. The other half of the program is about dialing back, you know, getting really clear, getting really focused around what it is that you really want to create in your life. What is the legacy that you want to leave? What is the fulfillment mean to you as an individual? Setting really clear, intentional, positive, focus goals around that.
Yeah.
And then working with them. And I always say to my students that, your goals become my goals. Your business is my business. Your next promotion is my promotion. And we're going on this journey to make this happen. So, so for me, I've seen, it's for me one of the greatest things is seeing women of color. Oh, so today I've had like 5 coaching students, and the greatest moment out of all those sessions was this one sister and we've been working together for 3 months, and she, the program only goes for 3 months, but you can renew and work with me for another 3 months, which is what she did. And so I said to her, part of the process is we create this, I have this, goal mapping session, and we just kind of park it and we leave it. And so what I did for her is I said to her, can you open up this card? Because I have a system, and I said, can you open up this card? I just want to invite you to just, have a look at this plan that you wrote for yourself. And so what happens is we set some really large goals, and then we break them down, and we have goals for month 1, month 2, and month 3. She'd hit, and they're split between left brain and right brain thinking. She'd hit all 3. So basically 6 goals. 6 goals, which is leading up to her big 6-month goal. And when she looked at it, I made her read it out loud, and she was like, "Oh my God, I did it! Oh my God, I did it! Oh my God!"
Wow. Yes.
I just sat back there like a big mom, like a proud mom, and was like, "Girl, it was all you. It was not me. It was all you."
Yeah.
And I was just like beaming, because I was just like so proud of her, and that's what she needed. And I said to her, because when she signed up with me, she didn't have, she didn't even have a job, and she put some serious skin in the game, and the world showed up in a massive way, because she set some pretty big goals for herself. And so for me, that has been the most rewarding thing, is seeing women of color go from here to over here and kind of grow things, and then take flight themselves, because the world needs that. The world is ready for women of color leaders. It needs women of color leaders. The question is, are you ready?
Wow. And what I always say is, you cannot be what you cannot see. If you cannot see yourself represented in visible areas, then you can't aspire to be that. And that has been very much my story, wanting to get into a certain kind of a job, but looking around saying, well, I don't see anyone who looks like me or sounds like me. Well, I guess then I cannot get in. So what you raised there is so, so important. There are people waiting to see that so that they can be that. So representation really, really matters, and visibility is really something I'm coming to learn, is really crucial in tying our dreams and being all that we can be.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Annie. So there's a thing that I work with my students, which is there's level 1 thinking and there's level 2 thinking. Level 1 thinking is very surface level, right? It's I can't see it to be it. Level 2 thinking is it has depth to it. So an example of applying that level 2 thinking is around this scenario of I can't see it to be it. So what I would ask an individual do is to go out and seek those people, because those stories are there. And I know this because this is my work, and I know so many stories. We don't have time to cover all of it, in this virtual event. But there are so many stories of women of color who have overcome extreme obstacles, both currently, in the last 50 years, and in the last 100 years and beyond that. And so what we need to be doing as women of color is not waiting for someone else to be that person, that we can then see it to be it. That is, to me, level 1. That is the easy way out. What we need to be doing is either answering the call and not being afraid of being the first or the only, or diligently having some depth to this thing that our soul and our spirit is craving, and seeking out those stories. Because even in the students that I work with, I generally know For example, some clients, for example, she might be a Black entrepreneur. So I generally know stories of famous, great Black entrepreneurs. And so I'll grab those podcasts, I'll grab those stories, and I'll send that to them as part of their homework. Or there might be Burmese. There's examples, there's stories out there, but are we going out there and reaching for what it is that we need to help propel us and move us forward? Or are we going to do the flip side and leverage the negative emotions that we have to propel us and move us forward? Of, I'm so sick and tired of not seeing it to be it, that I'm going to answer the call. And that is one of the things that pushed me to do it, was because what I said to myself is, if I firmly believe that women of color need to step up, how am I stepping up? So what I need to do is step from behind the brand or the image of my companies and step into the forefront and be vulnerable about it, regardless of trolling, regardless of negative comments, regardless of the difficult conversations and the accusations around who people think I am, and be bold in pursuing this work, because this is what I believe, that women of color need to be leaders. There needs to be more representation. So if I firmly believe that there needs to be more representation, what am I adding to that picture? Or am I just waiting for another sister to go and fill that seat?
Wow, that is a powerful question and thought, and I think we're gonna have to leave it there for today, Winitha. But before we wrap this up, please tell us about #Colorful Conference, please, and tell us about the community that you're building behind the scenes and how people can get involved. Tell us about your website, where we can find you, find out more about your work.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, actually. So Winitha Bonney, pretty active on LinkedIn. I also have a website, winitha.com/women of color, if you want to find out more about the work that I do. I do have a private, WhatsApp group. If you want to be a part of that, then just, connect with me on LinkedIn or on Facebook. It's my public page is Winitha Bonney as well. And I'll send you access to that group. It is a private group only. So it's only for self-identified women of color. And we do have some principles that we operate by within that community. Colorful Conference is coming up on the 1st of December 2020. And we are going to hopefully have a blend between physical events, which will be face-to-face, and live streaming options as well. It's going to be a powerful day with great speakers. I know I've been ranting on this webcast, but one of the things that I really wanted to do with this event is to actually not rant and rave about the problem, but to talk about solutions and to have inspiring speakers so that you can see it to be it and be surrounded by other women who also want amazingness, and that leadership is not defined about being a CEO or the amount of money that you earn, but it's really about self-leadership and having examples of that around you. And so that's happening on the 1st of December. I'm super positive. I'm super happy about it. It's been a work in progress. And it's just going to be a really powerful day with some incredible speakers.
Wow, I can't wait. I can't wait to see more about it. I can't wait to hear more about it and just to experience it, being the first of its kind. So Winitha Bonney, thank you so much for your time. You are a rising star for sure, and such a big cheerleader for women of color, and just providing the expertise that you do and the giving of your time. Oh my gosh, the giving of your time. I know that there's something you put up on LinkedIn where you were having 100 conversations in 100 days with women of color. And that is a huge, huge, huge undertaking. So thank you so much for the work that you do in this particular space. For those of you watching, I'm always talking about self-limiting beliefs and how to unshackle that. So if you haven't already, head over to upliftingstudios.com.au and download your free mindset audio guide, 3 steps to help you unshackle your self-limiting beliefs and begin to live a life of purpose and impact. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us.